Welcome back to the PFC podcast. The views and opinions you are about to hear are the speakers and do not necessarily reflect those of anyone else. Now on to the podcast.
Welcome back to the PFC podcast. This is Dennis, and this episode was recorded with the sponsorship and support of the Special Operations Medical Association. Thank you guys very much, and I hope you enjoyed the talk.
I'm an intro dude. The second time flight surgeon with the 160th. You can give a talk today about transfusion reactions based off analysis EVV trauma registry. Thanks to Adam Spanger, who's currently employed, did most of the light work and Mendel PowerPoint every day. Actually was here at fruition, and basically he was doing some brain medics. Was looking for some data on transfusion reactions. He loved it and available, so he reached out to Colonel Shower, who helped provide us with the data and did the analysis for us. Standard disclosure, the views aren't anything just as far as my unit, the Army, Department of Defense, U.S. government, and unfortunately not paid to dollars for anything. Bottom line up front, essentially patients that need massive transfusions and setting VCR are unlikely to develop transfusion reactions, and the benefits of the transfusions far outweigh any risk of reaction. So quick outlines, go through the background, methods, results, discussion, limitations. We'll also discuss some of the limitations throughout used to help make sense of the different data that's available, and then some future study ideas. So quick review, we all know hemorrhage control, blood transfusion, therapy drastically improves survival rates, and there's evidence to back it up. Looking into available data as far as transfusion reaction rates on the civilian side, there's limited on the military side. Trauma, a lot of the civilian studies are medical based or at least include patients with medical indications for transfusion, but the rate is somewhere around 1%, give or take, and there's significantly lower mortality with those transfusion reactions. Also, there's some data that low titer blood has contributed to lower rates of severe cumulative reactions. So, as far as methods, it was secondary analysis of the DV trauma registry. The data was pulled from 2007 to 2021, and it's essentially includes patients that got to gold tube loss with surgical care capability or higher. That's not including patients that did not get that level of care. When we searched and pulled all the transfusion reaction data, it does not include any specific information as far as what type of transfusion reaction occurred. It's just binary, whether or not it happened or not. And finally, with the data, we can't come to any conclusions as far as causation because it's retrospective in nature, but we can come up with a correlation and generate different hypotheses from it. So first up, all results. So looking on the screen on the left is the patients that got any FIRES transfusion, did not have a transfusion reaction. Now right is the patients that have had a transfusion reaction. So the rate in the patient population available was 0.83%. So it was 107 patients out of 12,818 that got blood products within the registry. Comparing the two groups, the patients that had a transfusion reaction, there was a slightly more increased percentage of U.S. military, 40% or 43%. And in the mechanism, there was a higher rate of explosive mechanism at 65% compared to 56% with the patients that did not have a transfusion reaction. They had similar injury severity scores of 17 and then 18 for the transfusion reaction group. And then the outcome to discharge was somewhat equivalent, but actually was higher for the patients with the transfusion reaction. Again, it doesn't differentiate whether or not it was like a physiologically significant transfusion reaction or if it was just a mild like viral reaction. So I don't think by any means that we should be shooting our patients that have a transfusion reaction. But that's just a quick overview as far as the demographics. Looking at the other data that we had is the median units of product transfused over the entire course of the patient's care. So the patients on the left are that 12,000-ish that did not have a transfusion reaction. They had significantly less product and chemotherapy transfused compared to the patients on the right. It doesn't stay within the registry of when the transfusion reaction occurred as far as like after what year of product specifically, and if the patient required more products, it just whether or not it happened. It does give a breakdown as far as what day it occurred, but not that specific time. It was like hours and minutes. So there was all of them occurred at day one or later, and then most of the reactions occurred at a level 3 or higher, which is 90% of those. So compared to civilian literature, our rate of transfusion reactions was essentially equivalent. Not sure if that it is because that there's a less likelihood that patients are going to generate immune response to the transfusions and trauma because they're just falling out, or if it's the blood that is getting transfused, they don't have definitive searchable control yet, and so that blood is needed in the system long enough to mount a reaction. Additionally, with the ISS, we're not sure what came first because the ISS is calculated at the end after patient care has occurred. So whether or not the ISS was due to the transfusion reaction and increased the overall injury severity for patient, or if it was just a reaction that had no physiologic consequence. So several limitations. We were talking about the difference as far as what products were being transfused and when, and the specific timing as far as the transfusion reaction. We don't have any information for patients that have had a transfusion reaction prior to level 2+. And if it did not make it there. And then with the ISS, we're not sure, it's possible that there were patients that had a big transfusion reaction. It was missed because they had critical illness, and it might have not had the equation to the transfusion itself. And then the biggest limitation is not knowing what type of reaction occurred. And then ultimately, there's product that might have been administered at point of injury to a patient that didn't take it, and it's not captured in this registry, so the transfusion reaction rate actually typically lower. But again, all these are hypotheses and we can't really prove causation. Future studies overall, ultimately, the registry currently, fortunately, is not generating patient and data points. So we're going to have to rely on our civilian counterparts to look into those things with trauma centers and see as far as the type of transfusion reactions that occur, if his rate is accurate. And then additionally looking further to whole blood, because I missed it here on this slide, but there wasn't any. As far as the median amount of whole blood transfused, it wasn't high in either the transfusion reaction patients or patients that did not have a transfusion reactions. Not sure if that data is skewed because of earlier on in the conflict and when a lot of the data points were generated, if those patients would have received a component therapy at that time. But ultimately, any questions? Here's a list of my references that grew to my discussion. Is that?
Can you break down the data segment further by gender?
Yep. So has it here, it was like 94% male for the no transfusion reaction and 99% made up for the transfusion.
What about females?
So
Do we got that? You have access to that data as well?
So yes, I guess because it would just be for under months. 94, right? Per MASH. Thank you.
That's it for today's podcast. Make sure to go to our website, www.prolongedfieldcare.org. Check out our free downloads and a ton of other helpful information. Grab a bag of our fresh roasted PFC coffee, links in the description below, and stay on the bleeding edge of combat and austere medicine. This is Dennis for the PFC podcast. Out.